Hey, everybody. I hope you are doing well. This is such a great episode with Rob Fonte. He's a fellow podcast host of the Leadership Jam Session. He's also an entrepreneur, a speaker, and him and I have a lot of similarities, which you'll definitely hear on this episode. So I hope you enjoy it, get a lot of good nuggets and value, and I will chat with you after the episode. If you've never heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast, and I'll explain really quickly. My favorite part, it's free. There's actually creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer if you want. It will actually distribute your podcast so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple, and many more, and you can actually make money from it without any minimum numbers of listeners, and it's everything that you need to actually make a podcast in one place. So do this, download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Blaze Your Own Trail podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Mendoza, and I've got a very special guest with me today. His name is Rob Fonte, and I'm going to give him just a second and tell us a little bit more about who he is and what he does.
Thanks, Jordan. It's great to be on your podcast. Appreciate the invite. And I own a management training, leadership development, coaching company that I launched about 3 years ago. And last year, I also launched a podcast called Leadership Jam Session.
That's awesome. And so one of the things I love to do on my show is really get context about our guests. So what part of the country did you grow up in? And what kind of kid were you? Were you more into school or more into athletics when you were younger?
Yeah, no, great. And my journey is a very convoluted journey at best with a lot of twists and turns. But I grew up in Jersey, and I come from a typical immigrant Italian family. First generation born. My parents and grandparents came off the boat. They literally took the boat over here. This was back in like the early 60s. And as a typical immigrant Italian family, my grandparents lived upstairs on the second floor. And so my grandfather was a huge inspiration, which I'll probably weave in a little while here. But as far as schooling goes, I would say I was probably more into sports than school for sure. I was an average school at best. I was the kid that like in high school would be in the hallway doing their homework like 5 minutes right before the class started. Right. So it was and when I went to college, and when I say went to college, I went like down the street because I couldn't get into a decent college, so I went to a county college for a couple of years. But yeah, it was, and the thing, really, I focused not only on sports, but on work. I mean, I had a pretty strong work ethic, and I think my first job was at 13. I think I was a dishwasher in a pizza place. And I always just worked throughout high school, particularly more in like construction and carpentry. And my grandfather was he was a tailor by trade, but he was always tinkering and very handy. And that left a huge influence on me. And so I always wanted to do work in construction and carpentry. And I did a lot of that all throughout high school and even college.
Okay, that's awesome. So think back to that first job at 13. I want you to think about the person that was managing you. Right now, you do a lot of management and leadership training today.
Yeah.
So can you give the audience maybe a nugget or two of some information you got from one of your first managers or leaders that has stuck with you today?
Well, if I actually go to my first job more in the corporate world, I would say it was the one that gave me a shot, that hired me into a different role that I probably shouldn't even have gotten. And yet that person took a chance on me. And I think, something that I always teach a lot of my clients now, and particularly in my workshops, that, great leaders have the ability to see the potential in others that they themselves don't see. And And that was one of my first managers in the corporate world anyway, that really left a huge impression on me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, shifting backwards, so you finish up high school, right?
Yeah.
You
I
you
made it
you
through.
scathed by high school, right? And I
Yeah.
listen, I didn't enjoy high school either. If I liked the class, I did well. If I didn't, then I didn't put in all the effort, right? Because
Right.
like you, I love to work. I love to do sales and just figure out
Yeah.
ways to like make more money, that
Yeah.
was more important to me at that age. So you finish up, you decide to go to college. Now, was this a choice that you had, or was this influenced by someone in the family? They're like, hey, you got to go to college. You got to at least take this next step. How did that all take place?
Oh, for sure. I mean, college was almost like non-negotiable, right? Particularly for my parents that didn't go, and that was their dream. It was the American dream to come here. Your kid's going to go to college. So no, and I did want to go to college, and my I first went to become a teacher, but then something happened. So it's interesting. In my first semester, and I hear my mother's voice in the back of my head, because all throughout high school she just kept complaining that you're just not applying yourself. And here I am now, my first semester, I'm getting straight A's, and I got straight A's all throughout the 2 years at this county college. And it was amazing that it's not that I was smart. Believe me, there's plenty of people smarter than I am. But what you just said, I really did put the effort in, and I had to. I had to work harder than most, and that was that work ethic in me as well. And then I got into Seton Hall, which was, my parents were thrilled. My father, especially, he loved Seton Hall, the thought of me going there. But then I took a different twist. I always had this crazy dream to build my own house. And again, I was always in carpentry and construction, still working, even in college, because I had to. And we had this other house in the family where my other set of grandparents lived. And by that point, they passed on. And my parents didn't really know what to do with the house. And it was kind of run down. So I said, all right, I'll make a deal with you. Let me fix it up. It'll take me like 3 months, and then we can sell it or whatever we want to do with it. What I failed to tell them was I was going to take a semester off of school. I drained all of my college money that they saved for me. And I had friends telling me, it's impossible. You're never going to be able to build this house in 3 months. You don't have enough money. And now look, Jordan, I'm like 20, 21 at the time. So I know everything, right? I'm the only sane person at this party. And 3 months came, I didn't even come close. Ran out of money. And then I started to realize, well, you know what? I think I'm the only crazy one at this dance right now. And it took me 3 years to finish that house. I was living paycheck by paycheck. And it was actually an experience that was a pivotal moment in my life, going through that experience, quite honestly. But I was very goal driven. I mean, I was pretty persistent. And so I learned how persistent I was and the importance of having goals. I also learned the importance of making realistic goals too. But once it was all said and done, 3 years later, I've got this house. And it was pretty cool as a 24-year-old to say that they built a house. I mean, it's cool to say it now. Back then, I didn't think so, because I didn't know what I was going to do with my life now. So my mom walks in, right? The house is done. And my mom was also a huge influence in my life too. And she's incredibly smart. And she looked at me and said, this is beautiful. Now what? And she just had a knack of just asking, the most simplistic questions that you think you'd be able to answer, but they really do bring a lot of self-awareness. So that was a decision point that, and I knew I wasn't going to do construction all my life. It was more like a hobby, and I was ready for the next chapter. And I think you can appreciate this, because I think we share a similar scenario. But my mother worked for a pharmaceutical company called Sharing Plow. They don't exist anymore. They were bought by Merck, but they were, back in the day, they made Claritin, Coppertone, suntan lotion. And she knew they were hiring for temps to work in a warehouse. And I needed benefits. And so I went to go, I got the job. And after 6 months, as a temporary employee, you do get benefits. And that decision to go work for that company basically put me on a completely different path that changed my life to this day.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it's always interesting how the places you least expect you're going to be end up being the best thing that ever happened, right? Because
Yeah.
the trajectory that then changed and the path that you started to go on. So that's awesome. And your mom's got your number always, right?
Yeah, they do.
they know what's best, and they know the right things to say, man. So that's awesome. All right. So you get this first role,
Yeah.
you're at this company. So what was, kind of your first 30 days like in this new corporate environment?
Well, I mean, it was very intimidating. Right? I mean, it was really my first corporate job, even though I was working in a warehouse and picking and packing boxes, driving a forklift. But still, it was a corporate environment, and it was intimidating. And this is where you kind of learn about humility and the importance of confidence and trying to build confidence. But I'll have to say that I became much more. The whole experience of building my house changed me in terms of becoming much more observant and methodical and really trying to be more strategic and thinking things through. So, I'd say the first 30 days was really more of just soaking it all in and figuring out, and even beyond then, what am I going to do? What's next for me? Right? And again, my whole goal there really was to try to get to 6 months, but then get permanent too. Because if you're permanent, they'll pay 80% of your college, so this is now, I still haven't finished my degree. I'm not back in college, and I had to think through, what am I going to do with that too?
Okay. So it sounds like it was very strategic, which is
Yeah.
great, right? And 3 years of building a house, you're going to learn a lot about strategy.
Oh
You're going to
yeah.
learn a lot about what works, what doesn't work, right? So that's great. So you had this plan in mind, right? Benefits were in sight, right? They were there. You just got to put 6 months in, and then after that, now you only got to pay 20% of 100 for school, right? So these are two things, and what I've learned so far is that anytime there's something that is challenging for you, you're like, challenge accepted. Let's do this, right? And it doesn't matter how long it's going to take. You're driven to make sure that you actually complete that task.
Yeah.
Right. So, all right. So you get there. Let's fast forward to 6 months. So benefits kick in, right? What's the next step? Where are you at by this point? What have you learned? Have you maybe moved up? Give some context about where you are now at that 6 month point.
Yeah. So, it's interesting as I think through that now. At the 6 month point, yeah, I got the benefits, so I'm happy. But I'm also in this weird place because now I start really having doubts in terms of what I've done thus far. Right? I've got friends graduating, they're already out of school working on their careers. And here I am wondering, all right, did I really make a mistake? Right here, what am I doing? I still don't know what I want to do. I'm still just a temporary employee, got benefits. And I realized that, and again, going back to your other question, I had some managers there that were really good about guiding me. And at that time, the sales, you're in sales, and you have the sales background. I know nothing about sales. All I did know was that the sales reps at that time in this company, who were calling on physicians and hospitals, had a great career, making a lot of money. And a lot of people were guiding me, you should go into sales, have a great personality. And so I was starting to formulate another goal. All right, maybe I should try to get to sales. It's going to be very hard to get there. And I need my degree too. Right. So what's interesting is when I look back at that point in my life, I was really kind of like somewhat in a I don't want to say a dark place, but almost like a depressed state of mind. That did I just waste 5 or 6 years of my life? Of course, when you go through these challenges, you don't realize it then that it does put you on a path. You just can't see it yet. And reflecting back, I wouldn't change anything for it, because all that made me who I am today, and it did put me on a path.
Yeah, right. And a lot of times, personal growth can't be seen by the human eye, right? Like no one can
Totally.
see how much you've grown based on all the mud that you have drug yourself through, right?
Right.
It's kind of like this invisible thing. But no, I mean, if you think back and just in hearing the journey, I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
had to have grown. Like you were forced into
Yeah.
growth, right? It was like the training ground to building everything that you are to this point,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So all right, So did you take their advice, right? Did you say, you know what, let's do this? Like sales sounds like another challenge, sounds like another thing that I can,
Mhm.
go after.
Yeah, totally. And it was a step process. First, I had to get permanent, and this goes back to the question you asked me before. So it took me 2 years to get permanent at the company, and that's where that manager took a shot at me and brought me into a customer service environment. So here I come from the warehouse. Now they put me in like an office environment. I had to go out and buy a suit and tie. I didn't even know how to tie a tie, and this manager took a shot on me. And this was a call center where the sales force would call in for all their supplies. And so it kind of got me one step closer. And now I went back to school. Now I'm going to school at night at, at Kane University. I switched colleges. So this is my third college. And I changed my major to a business major. And I was in that department for a couple of years and thrived, did great. And then somebody else took a shot on me. There was a marketing director, the Clarendon marketing team, and we supported that team in the role I was in, and they were creating a new position, and he brought me into the team. Again, no business being on this team. Didn't have my degree yet. Now I'm on this Clarendon marketing team, which at the time was basically paving the way and best practices for a lot of pharmaceutical companies to follow. And I was in this department, again, very intimidating. But I did finish my degree, and after a couple of years. So, by the way, for those of your listeners that are listening and thinking, "Wow, it's a pretty inspirational story," it's not. Don't use me as a best case scenario for your kids, because it took me 10 years to get my degree. So even with my boys right now, I got twin boys that are 17 going on 3, and I tell them, "Yeah, you're not taking 10 years to get your degree. Don't take my path. It was a hard, I always took the hardest path. Why? I have no idea. But I eventually did get my degree. And so 5 years, almost to the day when I took the job in the warehouse, 5 years later, I got my first role as a sales rep with that company.
Okay. Listen, and that was a hard fought journey, right? You went
It
from
was.
the warehouse, right? From the
Yeah.
warehouse, forklifts, right? Listen, you went through several different environments, different landscapes, if you will, right? I mean, where I've been in a warehouse before when I worked at Fred Meyer's and drove their forklifts back when I was 17 years
Yeah.
old, and that's tough. That's a different types of people, different personalities, and then you go from there to a customer service world where you don't even know how to tie a tie, you don't have a suit, and now you've got to go and now you're a grown up, right? Like, cause you're going to this new environment where people are super professional. And
Yeah.
so that was probably intimidating. But the interesting thing that I'm noticing is people see something in you, right? To take a shot on you, because the first time, no experience, didn't have any of that, but people could see. And the thing that I'm really pinpointing here is it's a work ethic thing. This
Uh-huh.
is this is grandpa coming out. This is,
Right.
let's jump in that dirt. I'm going to put my head down, and no matter how long it takes, I'm going to get it done.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And it's always about trying to prove yourself, because I'm surrounded by people who went to, big name colleges and, possibly Ivy League colleges. And so I always had to work harder in order to prove myself, if that makes sense. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was, like I say now, I wouldn't change that experience for anything, because as we talked about, it kind of makes you who you are today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. So year one in sales, right? So you make it 5 years from forklift to salesman. Now
Right.
let's talk about what was that transition like from the marketing team, right? You guys were doing some new things and trying to be,
Mhm.
revolutionary for its time. And now you move into sales, because, sales and marketing, some people try to mix them up and say they're the same thing, but they are completely different, right? Marketing is trying to gain visibility and traffic to get the sale, but it's not, it's the step before, right?
Yeah.
So give the audience some context. What was that transition like going from one team to another? Because in a lot of times, some organizations, there's even infighting with the two. So can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
So you're spot on. There's usually a lot of friction between sales and marketing at times. And I did it ass backwards, to be honest. a lot of the people in marketing, the one thing our company did good is they usually brought people from the field into marketing, which was good. And that was usually the step. I did it backwards. And so there was a little bit of resistance when I hit the field because I had no sales experience. Here's a marketing guy coming. And, people are just probably sitting there thinking, or they were thinking, oh, he's just, going to be out here for 6 months just so he can get the stamp on it. And actually that was the plan, which I didn't agree with at all. I always felt that if you're going to do a role, you need to do it for the right amount of time, learn it, and do it well. And they put me in Brooklyn. And there's some really nice parts of Brooklyn. The parts I had were all, not the nice parts. And it was a very challenging territory. But I have to say, it was one of the best territories. Because by the perception of, you get fooled into thinking, oh, you're going to work in all the posh areas, the real nice areas. It was better to be in some of these other areas because you're dealing with real people, real issues. And I loved it, enjoyed it. I mean, it was a hard transition for me personally, because I never been in sales, and, you get rejected, and how do you, get right back up and get back in there. But it was a great experience. I loved it. I was in that territory for 2 years, became one of the top territories in the nation. And then from there, I moved into hospital sales in Manhattan and was there for a couple of years before I landed my first management job.
So let's give the audience some context, because, my audience, I've got some that are younger, some in the middle, and some that are a little older. So,
Sure.
this wasn't these weren't phone sales. Like, you were actually going to businesses, right, to try to market and offer your product. So you were essentially cold calling within a territory. Right. So give people some context here that have never done this. And
Sure.
and then I'll give you kind of my thoughts on this type of sales as it relates to being foundational for people. So give people some context. Well, what was a day in the life like doing that type of sales? And I want the good, the bad, and the ugly. So, because I know it from experience. There's a lot of crazy things that happen when you're out there going business to business. So
yeah. So in this type of sales, we're calling on physicians, and actually we do have a set audience that we're responsible for, and we go in and we try to meet with the physicians, and it's really more about educating them on the differences of the product and some of the side effects, and helping the nurses, and at that time it was more of calling on allergists, ENTs. Later in my career, when I switched companies, it got much more in depth and serious because I was dealing with cancer patients, right? But in my first role there, there's some of the challenges is here you are. It could be very intimidating. You're basically trying to educate somebody who has like 8 years of schooling as a physician. So let's think about that. That in itself can be extremely intimidating, and you're trying to differentiate your product versus some of the other products out there, and why patients would fare better on your product versus another. And so you can imagine some of the tough discussions that take place. There's a lot of great physicians out there, and there are some that won't even give you the time of day, and that's the reality of sales. I don't care what you're selling or what industry. That's part of but you did have to be very, very, the training around it was so critical because you had to have really in-depth clinical knowledge of what you were selling so you can speak to it and speak intelligently.
that's it. Yeah. And, there's a lot of things, I think, when you're doing sales of that manner, because there is a gatekeeper, right? There's somebody
Totally.
right in front. So that's got to be your first focus is, how do I get to this person? I don't know what type of day he or she's having, and how do I get them to get me to the physician that I need to speak with, right? So I tell a lot of people when it comes to sales like that, there's some things that are foundational. Smile, right? Make sure you're smiling when you walk into the office. Eye contact, right?
Yeah.
Enthusiasm. You gotta be excited about what you're doing to try to relay that message to them. So
Yeah.
what are some foundational things that you found in having to deal with kind of some of those gatekeepers and things like that you think helped you get the meetings?
So it was, you bring up a great point. It was all in the gatekeepers, right? I mean, and it's almost as if you need to treat them that they are the most important person. And right. And a lot of it is egos, but some of it is some of these individuals are not treated very well or fairly. And so they're looking for attention too. And a lot of these people are great people. And some of them can be, you know, mean and nasty, but you have to understand and figure out where is it coming from. Right. And that's kind of like the first step is really to help understand how can you work with this person better. And everybody has different styles and different approaches. And you yourself almost have to be a chameleon in some sense. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's really about trying to, adapt your style to the person sitting in front of you so you can relate better. I'll tell you this, just a quick story, and this is sad. I shouldn't even admit this, but in Brooklyn, the doctor's offices were basically like, you can hit like 4 in the same block, if you will, right? There's many of them. And I got hooked on General Hospital. All right, this is back in like, I think 2000 or 2001 when I took my first, in Brooklyn, my first sales job. And I got so friendly and built great relationships with the office staff. And a lot of them would watch General Hospital. And so as I'm standing there waiting for the doctor, talking to them and watching the show, I got hooked on it. So I would go from I would time depending on the location of the day, I would time my office visits between commercial breaks and go to the next office and try to get the next segment of that's a terrible story, but that also goes to show you a lot of the gatekeepers really appreciated that, and they thought it was hilarious too, and would kind of wait for me and bring me up to speed on the episode.
Listen, you should not apologize for that because that's a brilliant strategy,
Right.
right? If you really think about it, there's 3 ingredients that go along with, that smile, eye contact, enthusiasm. And it's the 3 R's. It's called read, relax, and relate, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you walk in, you try to read the situation, you try to read the person. And then you have to relax your body because when you're relaxed, it's contagious. They're going to be relaxed.
Yeah.
And then find something to relate to them about. General Hospital.
Right.
You literally did those ingredients brilliantly and it worked for you. So
Yeah.
it's to me, it's strategy, right? And so
Strategy.
interesting tidbit here. My mom, she isn't with us anymore, but she was actually born in General Hospital in Los Angeles, like the real
Really?
General Hospital. Yeah. Yes. What they made the show off of, which is very crazy. So, all right. So you're in sales. How long were you in sales before you get that first opportunity as a manager?
3 years. It happened pretty quickly, actually. And I got my first opportunity 3 years later. And they offered me, so here's the crazy part. They offered me my first management position. It was the most tenured team in the nation. And it was in, by God, West Virginia. So I had to relocate my family. And so they take this guy who has home office experience, who was in Brooklyn and sales in Manhattan, and they move him to take over a team in West Virginia. My first conference call, Jordan, you could hear crickets. Like nobody spoke. And I know what they were all thinking, like, why are they sending this guy down here? It's going to be a disaster. But that was my first team that I took over.
Okay. So what was that conversation like with the family? Like, hey, I know we're here in New York, but get excited. I just got a promotion and we're going to, drum roll please, West Virginia, right? What was that conversation like?
Yeah, it was a very quiet conversation. There was no enthusiasm in that one. And at the time, my twin boys were 16 months old. So here I am taking my wife, who's a Jersey girl. Right? So that's the other disaster in the making, bringing a Jersey girl down to West Virginia, and taking her away from all her support structure. But we knew that this was, and she was great. It was very supportive, but we knew this was kind of the next step, and we figured we'd be there for a couple of years, and we try to make it back. And I'll tell you, the team, it was a great team to cut your teeth on for a first management team. it was a very humbling experience for me. Most of the people on the team were older than me. Again, very intimidating. And it was a great team to learn and be a part of. In fact, there's some of them I still talk to this day, and that was almost 15 years ago.
That's awesome. So can you give the audience a little context? So how many people were on this team, and were you able to instantly come in and recognize, their personalities and how to deal with them? Because again, let's go back to the training ground, 3 years in sales, walking into offices, 10, 20, 30 offices a day, you're going to build up some ability to be able to read people. So when I think about that experience, I'm thinking that it probably helped you be able to understand and read these new folks that you're managing.
Totally. It totally did. I mean, and that's the first strategy, something I talk about a lot with leaders who I work with currently, is that when you take over a team, the first thing you want to do is listen, and listen well, and really understand your people, the strengths that they bring to the team, that they bring to the table, because everyone's going to be very different on the team, right? So the way I coach you is going to be very different than the way I manage somebody else, and you really need to take that tailored approach, if you will. So my first month was really listening, and I wasn't going to come in with like a super manager tattooed on my chest. This was a well-seasoned, high-performing team, and it was really figuring out, how can I bring them value? How can I partner with them? So to your point, it really is trying to figure out what makes each person tick, which doesn't happen overnight. That takes time.
Absolutely. Yeah. It has to take time in order to get to the position to be that well-oiled machine, right? You have to get on the same page. But yeah, if you would have went in there guns a-blazing, I'm this new hot shot from New York, guess
Right.
what? You would have lost them. You would have lost them real quick. So, taking a methodical approach where you're actually listening and trying to get context about them and learn about how they are as a human, right? I mean, because, when you're a manager, you're dealing with human capital, right? You are investing in other people. And from my perspective, when you're a manager, you work for them, not the other way around, right? Because when you partner with people, you get a lot better results.
It's so true. And, when you take over a team, the only thing your employee is thinking about right now, they're trying to answer one question, and one question only. Who is this person standing in front of me, and what type of leader are they going to be? Will they have my best interest at heart? That's really what any employee is trying to figure out when a new leader comes in. And knowing that, when I walk in, it is really about trying to prove that I do have their best interest at heart, which doesn't happen on day one. I mean, that takes time. And you arrive there with each person at different points in time, which gets into trust. So you're right. It really is about understanding your employees and proving to them that, you are there. And all my teams over the years came to understand that I am there for one purpose, and one purpose only, for them. That's the only reason why I'm there. Yeah, we have corporate goals and all that, but I am in it really for them, because I can't achieve my goals if they're not achieving their goals.
That's exactly it, because the way that you advance is by the other people that are on your team, and so my goal when I was a property manager, my goal was to have everybody get to the next position. So if you're a leasing professional, I wanted you to be an assistant. If you're an assistant, I wanted you to be a manager, because if I'm not duplicating myself, meaning feeding into people so that they're advancing, then I'm actually not doing my job.
Right.
And
Totally.
there are other people that look at it the other way. Like, I don't want them to take my job. I'm like, listen, if you can take it, I want you to grow. I don't want to hold people back, because in this life, it's all about growth. It's all about getting, hitting our goals and getting that next level.
Yeah. I mean, my greatest achievements were really some of the employees that I've led who won awards or gone on to whatever their goals were, to help them achieve their goals. One of the greatest highlights of my career was with a different team, was there was this very prestigious award that's only given out to a few, and it's more of like a career type of an award. And I had 3 people on my team that won it in 1 year, which to me was like one of the greatest, highlights. And that was their goal to try to achieve, and it clearly deserved it. So it is really about, I often talk about, and a lot of leaders don't get this, that as leaders, you make a profound impact on your employees' lives. And sometimes you don't even realize it till like years later. By this point, I've been very observant of all the leaders that I've worked for, and, good ones, and I had some bad ones. And you can learn just as much from a bad leader than you can a good leader of what not to do.
And sometimes more, yes.
Yeah, exactly. And, the important thing is that you really do have a profound impact. And even as I think back to that first person that took a shot on me and brought me into that customer service, I really didn't appreciate that and knowing that until years later, right? So, and that's part of the hard part about leading, is sometimes you don't know the impact you're making, or when your employee realizes it down the road. But we do make a huge impact, and sometimes we have a negative impact as well, and we need to be aware of that. And look, we spend the majority of our time at work, right? If you mind us out sleeping, right, the majority of our waking moments are spent over a lifetime at work. And the manager makes a huge impact to the quality of that person's life, both professionally and personally.
Yeah, no, and I'm not a big fan of math, but one thing that stuck out to me, I can't remember who said it, but they said, as a leader, you're doing one or two things. You're either adding or subtracting. So do
Right.
you want to be the person that's adding value to people, or taking value away? And I know for me, I would prefer to add value to others.
Totally agree.
All right, so West Virginia, you were down there. You've got this new team. How long were you there on this particular assignment? And did you end up staying with the same company, or did you leave? And I don't think we're to the point yet to where you've launched out on your own. So what was the next step for you?
So 2 years, I actually got promoted into another sales manager position. It was more of a specialty sales force dealing with specialty products. That did afford us the opportunity to move back. And so we moved back to the East Coast, and I was there for a couple of years. But at that point, the company was changing. New management was coming in that took over the company, and I kind of knew where they were headed with this. And at this point, I had formulated some pretty strong convictions on the culture and managing. And I knew that I needed to make a change. I wasn't going to change my core principles for any one person or any company. And it was a very hard decision for me. I was there in that other role for 2 years, and then I finally did leave, which was hard for me. I mean, think about it. The company gave me everything. They supported me. I mean, however, the way I kind of served it up was the company I was leaving was not the company I grew up with anymore. And a lot of people were leaving. And so at that point, I switched and joined, and that was 12 or 13 years with that company. And I jumped ship to a different company.
Okay. So with this new organization, and it gets you closer to home, you're back on the East Coast. So what was this new role, and how long were you there?
Yeah. So this new company was another pivotal moment that put me on, the next chapter in my life. And the position I took was a sales manager position, and they were expanding, and it was basically almost like a startup type of feel. They were expanding. It was a sales manager role, and I was building out a team. And I was only in that role for maybe about 15 months. And the company knew I had home office experience, and they were growing and expanding, and they were based in New Jersey. And they asked me to come in and help build out all the management training. They knew I had I was passionate about, I had some strong convictions, and I was passionate about managing people. So they asked me to come in and build out the management training. So Jordan, I will tell you that of all the positions I was thinking of evolving into, training was at the bottom of my list. In fact, it wasn't even on my list. It wasn't even a thought in my mind. But I thought it'd be a cool project. I thought I would do it maybe for a year. And I took the role, and that just took a life of its own. And again, this goes back to there was the person who was in charge of training. she saw something in me that I didn't see, that I was completely blind to. And she took a chance on me. And once I was in the role, I was all in, loved it, became certified to teach all different courses, loved facilitating, working with leaders at all levels. Went back, got a master's in organizational behavior, became an academically trained coach, certified executive coach. So here's somebody who took me 10 years to get my bachelor's, and I get my master's in like 3 years, and did that role for 5 years. And I was good. I could have done, I found what I was meant to do in life. I'm good. You know, I had a goal of becoming a regional sales director. That just went by the wayside. I loved what I was doing. Of course, there was our executive, the vice president of our division, came to me and sat me down and said, you know, this was 5 years later now. We have an opening as a regional sales director. I think you should take it. And I realized that I was going to be moved into that role regardless. There really was no thinking. But again, to her credit, she realized I had a gap that needed to be filled. Up until all this management experience that I had was with frontline managers. I never had second line leadership experience, managing managers. And here I am doing all the management training for all levels of management, including her direct reports, the business heads. And so it was a gap, and I did take that role. And I had a region with 5 sales managers, about 50 reps or so, and loved the role as well. And I did realize that I did have some gaps. It is, you know, managing managers is different, some different set of skills that are required that I didn't realize was important at that time.
That's awesome. So for one, the role that you did for 5 years, that's what I've been doing for the last 8. So I love it. I love teaching and training, and I get to teach a 6-month leadership program every year, and then sales. And so what was that experience like for you? So now you're coming from West Virginia, you get back to New York, and all of a sudden now you're an instructor, like you're doing instructional design, and you're having to facilitate and you know, the prep time that goes into teaching, and then having to capture an audience's attention. Right. So all these are all things that are new that you said, like, this wasn't even on my list. Right. So what was that experience like, being in that role? And then obviously you were there 5 years before you went to the next venture. So what was that like for you?
Yeah, you know, if you can tell, there's a pattern of me getting thrown into roles that I had no business getting into, right? And so there is that learning curve that goes into it. But by this point, you know, I took a little bit of a different approach. While I didn't have any training experience, what I did know is what managers wanted out of training and what they didn't want. And so I brought that experience into the facilitation room, into the classroom, and you know, it took a while. Fortunately, I had a great boss, right? The person that recruited me in was very good about teaching me. And I think that is something very important that people need to realize. You know, when you're put into a role, what type of support are you going to have? Is the person are they setting you up for success or failure? So fortunately, I had a good manager that was teaching me along the way. But it was, you know, it was a long road of learning. And the one thing that I realized is, you know, I quickly put together an advisory team of other managers because I knew I didn't have all the answers. And why not tap into, you know, other people's perspectives and insights to help me build out everything. But, you know, it took time. You have to put the time in. These are different set of skills. Facilitating is different than presenting, as you know, right? It is.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
So I just had to really put the time in to develop some of these new skills. But it's easier to do that when you enjoy what you're doing.
That's it. Yeah, no. And you were the type of person that wanted to go all in and everything, whatever new venture it was, right? And that's brilliant, bringing subject matter experts in, because then they get some limelight, they get to shine, but you get to partner with people that know about things, like you said, that maybe you're not privy to, right? So those partnerships I can attest to that. They are foundational, right? When you
Yeah.
bring other people in, because when you don't bring them in, that can cause a whole nother series of problems and
Right.
issues. So
Yeah.
you take the sales management job. All right, so go ahead. You had something there, so go ahead.
Well, no, the other thought, and I'm sure you appreciate this, is
Yeah,
training usually has a negative stigma attached to it, right? And so it's hard to build credibility. So when you bring people in, they become your advocates for you, and because they feel like they're part of it, building it with you. So that
that's
was a lesson I
exactly
learned
it.
too.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
and that's a key part of change management, right? When
Mm-hmm.
they're and this is the type of change, and so you have to have stakeholders, you have to have people that have your back,
Yeah.
so that they're a larger voice than you are, right? Because you're the new guy in the role. What
Yeah.
do you know coming from West Virginia? You know what I'm saying? So
Right.
so
Exactly.
yeah, you got to get those key stakeholders to be advocates for you. Absolutely. So you get out of that role, okay? You thrived in it. You partnered with some folks. Now you get into this new sales role. They notice there's a gap. You agree with that gap. So what was it like now managing managers, right? Because you went from managing to having a bunch of indirect reports like I do now. I have a couple hundred indirect reports.
Yeah.
I don't manage anybody, but I still think that you do. You do in a lot of capacities. But now you're managing other managers. So what was that first 30 days like?
It was interesting. I realized while a lot of the basics applied, there were some nuances that I didn't realize. And the one thing that I quickly had to learn is as I was not only meeting with my managers, but I also met with the reps reporting into them that were in my region. And the thing that really stood out to me was I had to really walk a fine line to make sure I wasn't that I wasn't undermining my managers. And again, your reps, they want to build relationships with you as the regional director. But I had to really be very conscientious to make sure that I wasn't overstepping or giving direction and replacing, inadvertently replacing the role of my manager. Right. And I that was one thing that really stood out, that balancing act.
Okay. And so how long were you in that role until the next opportunity came?
I was in that role for 3 years. So yeah. And the other thing I learned too was that just because I stand in front of the room and I, lay out a vision, to think that everyone's going to remember that if I say it one time, again, I was, operating in a different universe. It's amazing how many times you have a vision and you set expectations. You have to continuously repeat it to make sure it does cascade down throughout your ranks. But I was in that role for about 3 years and I loved it. It was, and then I started thinking, well, maybe I could do this now for the rest of my life. You always go through that type of mindset. You kind of don't know what you don't know until you get into the role.
Okay. So what was the next step?
The next step was so the culture again started shifting big time. And I think it's inevitable sometimes, when small organizations grow and they become bigger, I think it's sometimes hard to keep that special cultural feeling. And again, I knew that I started to realize this wasn't the place for me anymore. And that's when I launched my company. I figured, you know what, I love what I'm doing. Why not try to bring more value to a broader group of people?
Yeah, and if you think about it, right, and you think about the warehouse role to where you had gotten to that point, right? You went from warehouse to call center to
Yeah.
field sales to training, and then
Mhm.
to managing managers. All of that to me is experience, right?
Mhm.
You gained knowledge in this aspect, you gained knowledge here, went down this path here. So yeah, why not take all of that, package it into your own thing, right? Which is
Yeah.
what you did. And
Yeah.
so what was the first step, or what was that conversation like with your wife when you just said, hey, listen, like, this long journey I've been on, yeah, I think I'm ready to jump out on my own.
Yeah. My poor wife, she's been great. She's been supporting me all throughout these changes all the years. And she didn't even hesitate. She was, she's like, I think you should do it. And it, again, you have to remember, I'm now very strategic in my life about pulling the trigger on something based on, it goes back to that building that house. And so it took me a while to get there, but no, she was very supportive. And, it's hard to know that, are you going to get, clients right out of the gate? And timing is everything. I think you can use that phrase for everything in life, right? And fortunately for me, there was a lot of people leaving that were at different companies now that went through a lot of my training or were coached by me. And it didn't take long. I think within a month, I had my first client, and then it just grew exponentially beyond that.
That's awesome. And, I really feel like that house, man, it's been the analogy for your journey,
Yeah.
you built a leadership house that
Yeah.
you're able to now turn into a business,
Yeah.
but the lessons that you learned back then have definitely been paving the way with your resilience and your hard work and your efforts. And, and I know in your mind, you're like, man, this took forever, but you have something meaningful, right? So let's give the audience some context on your business, and then we'll
Sure.
also talk about your show, because you also have a podcast as well. And I'm excited to be coming on your show as a guest and being on the other side of the table here soon. So give us some context about what exactly you offer for your business, and then we'll jump into your show.
Yeah, sure. And I offer a variety. I have my business is like in 3 buckets. I do a lot of management training. I build customized management training curriculums with a wide range of offerings, whether it's situational disc, emotional intelligence. I do have my second bucket is I built a course for emerging leaders. I do have a special place in my heart for the individuals that are looking to become leaders one day. And I think there's great benefit in providing them with foundational training before they ever even take over a team. It's unfortunate how many people are thrown into management without ever having any training. It's bizarre.
This guy right here.
Yeah, and it's and it's sad if you think about it. I mean, would you ever go to a dentist and let them drill in your teeth without them ever having any training? Right? I mean, and some people will say, well, that's not a fair analogy. Well, think about it. Managing people is, at the first line manager, is probably one of the most important roles in the organization. And yet we do not consistently get people trained before to ever take over a team. Right? And so much damage is done along the way. And then my third bucket is I have a large coaching practice. So I do a lot of one-on-one coaching with leaders of all different levels.
All right. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so let's get into the podcast. So it's the Leadership Jam session. And so when did you decide to launch the show? What was this conversation like? And, who was it that said, you know what, like, you do all this training, why not add another medium to your business?
So I have somebody on my team that handles all my marketing, and he was pushing me for a year to do a podcast. And again, I kind of feel like I live in a cave. I never listened to a podcast up until he started pushing me to launch one. And my whole approach and how I facilitate my classrooms, it's very, very interactive. I know that most people don't want to sit there and listen to me talk all day. I don't want to hear myself talk all day. The best learning comes from when managers sit in a room and they learn from each other. They share experiences. It's like a good old-fashioned jam session, right? We bring musicians together to just jam, and some of the best music comes out of that. So I took that philosophy from my classroom into the podcast world. And thanks to my person who runs my marketing, pushed me into launching the Leadership Jam session. And that's exactly what it is. I bring on leaders to really just talk about some of the challenges that they're up against and the best practices on how they would deal with it. It goes beyond just concept and theory, right? It's the application piece. And yeah, I'm excited to get you on as a guest too here in the near future.
Awesome. Well, hey, listen, this has been great. Really getting some context into who you are and all about what you do. And I'll make sure that all of your info is down in the show notes. But just give the audience, where's the best place to get in touch with Rob? They listen to this, they get a ton of value out of it. Where do you want people to come find you?
Yeah, you can just look me up on any social media platform. You just look up Rob Fonte, or you can even go to the website and you look up leadershipjamsession.com and you'll find me there as well.
Perfect. Well, hey, Rob, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the Blaze Your Own Trail podcast.
Yeah, this has been great. Thanks for having me.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in to that episode with Rob Fonte. What a great guy. Make sure you connect with him. All of his info, his social links, as well as his website are down in the show notes. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the show and be sure to rate and review us on iTunes. It's going to help us rank higher so we can reach and impact more people. So please do that. And also tell all your friends about the show if you enjoy it. Have an amazing rest of your day, and I can't wait to chat with you on the next episode.